Anything worth doing is worth overdoing. Mick Jagger. All right. Good morning and welcome to another morning episode of the Liberty Dad podcast, a discussion on politics and culture. I'm your host, DL, America's most objective libertarian. If you're tuning in live, thank you so much for giving me your time so early. Look, folks, I'm all for borders. You know, liberty doesn't mean chaos, but feels like people are hoping that ICE rounds up folks like Pokemon cards. And for what? A lot of these people are just trying to live, work, and dodge the tax man like any red blooded American. Yet, here comes the state flexing its bloated muscles, acting like it owns the place. Newsflash, it doesn't. People aren't cattle to be branded and shipped off because some suit in DC says so, or because some American has bought into their BS. If you're a thug or a leech, sure, kick them out. Freedom's not a free lunch. But this is authoritarian theater, starring a guy with a spray tan and a fetish for control. Maybe instead of deporting immigrants, we deport the bureaucrats clogging up our lives. Less government, more liberty. Now that's a policy I'd salute. All right, let's get into this. Let me make sure that everything's some quirky things going on here. I think we're all good to go though. Let's see. Yeah, I think that's good. There we are. All right. Why is that? This should be. Looks like it's not playing on social on X. I'm not sure. I don't think the stream has made it. Great. I broke the stream for X already. I don't know. Maybe I didn't. I don't know. Let's see. Let me refresh it real quick. Yeah. Looks like it's not playing. Let me check my phone and we'll just dive right into it. Let me just check. If somebody can take a look. I did things a little out of order this morning, and you know what happens when we do things out of order. But we will have to just do the show as normal. And I've got to do a bunch of things this morning. Goodness. Okay, there we are. That should be good enough. All right. Well, it looks like That's weird. It looks like it did not get the feed over to social media. So I will have to post this to Twitter later, to X, because apparently I made a mistake here. I don't know why. It says live, but now I can't see it. Let me see here. There's the Okay. I do see it. Okay, I found it. It's just wonky. It's looking weird. I don't know. Whatever. All right. Let's get into this. It's been a busy weekend. Let me explain myself really quickly. I simply dug too far into the rabbit hole, and yesterday I was not ready. I got to a point where I saw a couple things, and then I was like, oh, I was curious, and so I just started digging and looking and reading, and I was like, oh, this is going to be a good topic. I should talk about this, and then before I knew it, I was way behind and not prepared for a show. So I was like, all right, well, maybe I'll try to. And I'm always so ambitious when things don't work my way. Cause I was like, all right, well, I'll do the show later. But yesterday I had, I had that going on. My family's out of town. So while that sounds nice, I get my routine gets disrupted easily. And so therefore, it becomes a challenge necessarily sometimes because I get too busy doing one thing and then I don't leave and, go take care of other things and whatever. My schedule gets messed up in the first couple of like if my wife leaves for like 2 weeks, the first several days, I'm like totally I'm in disarray. And then after that, I kind of get back on, the horse and I ride along, or I don't know, some analogy like that. So anyway, so yeah, I just kind of got my things all mixed up yesterday. Then I had work, of course, and then I also had a meeting. Well, not really a meeting, but I went and I listened in on a panel that the local Americans for Prosperity group was hosting. So they had John Rutherford come out, give us a bunch of blah 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 whatever. So anyway, let's dive into this. We're going to talk immigration and the issue of deporting people under the War Powers Act. Here is what got me down this rabbit hole. So let me just pull this up right here. So we've got this young man here, and his name is Chris Mowry, I believe. One of those, 20 something, influencers for the Democratic Party. Basically, I know him and Harry Sisson and some of the others. They're like, oh, I'm not getting paid. And it's like, okay, but you're doing all these videos for free somehow. Like, okay. I mean, I suppose, it's always possible. And you're that excited about the president, not the president now, but at the time, you're that excited about Biden. And then when they swapped out Biden for Kamala, it was like you're that excited on cue for Kamala, and you just naturally like you like that seems a bit weird, but okay, you're not getting paid in any way whatsoever. So he says, we're in the deepest constitutional crisis since the Civil War. Trump is defying federal judges. The executive is ignoring the judicial and in turn breaking our checks and balances. People don't understand that checks and balances only work when people believe in them. Okay, so before we dive into it, like things don't just work because you believe in them, Chris. Like let's just start with that. Um, so then that wasn't really what caught my attention. That really got me down the rabbit hole. It was this comment here. It was this next one. This comes from the redheaded libertarian. You've probably seen her, massive following, does all the spaces. I think her real name is Josie. It's not a secret. There's no doxing here. But this is what she responded to Chris with. She said, in Ludecke, and I think it's Ludecke, SCOTUS ruled the Alien Enemy Act grants the POTUS broad discretion to remove alien enemies during war, invasion, incursion, that it persists until formally ended, treaty or proclamation, and SCOTUS is outside its powers to interfere, you Constitution retard. So I was curious and I started digging, and summary of here's what I found. Chris is wrong, and the redhead misrepresents the case. Chris is 22, like something like that. And he can kind of be somewhat excused for a poor take. I mean, no insult to younger folk here, but you just lack experience and knowledge that gives you wisdom. That's what wisdom is: experience and knowledge, right? You have the knowledge, and then you have the experience how to apply it. So you just lack that. Just just naturally. There's nothing you can do about it. I mean, there are 22-year-olds out there that are very perceptive and aware of the world. That's not most of them, and that's definitely not Chris based on the things that I've seen from him. He's just some 22-year-old guy that has a bunch of takes that seem like they're spoon-fed to him. But anyway, he's 22. So like, yeah, okay, we'll cut you some slack a little bit. You're still wrong, and I'll explain why. And then the redhead, well, she's a self-described constitutional scholar, and she's older, so she should have that wisdom by now. So therefore, I'm going to be a little tougher on her, right? But let's start with Chris's comment. So let's go back to that real quick, and we're going to walk through his comment, and we're gonna see what we learn. And then after the break, we will dive into the redheads, and by the end of the show, hopefully, you will understand why it is that you should care, why this is a big deal, why you should care, and maybe even be very concerned. So let's go back to his comment. There we go. All right, we're in the deepest constitutional crisis. So he makes a couple of claims. He says we're in the deepest constitutional crisis. Well, actually, that's pretty much the basis of his claim. Now, here's the thing: there is no formal definition that I could find, leaving this a question for everyone to just debate. But but Chris follows that with, quote, Trump is defying federal judges, end quote. So at least we have a reasoning that we can evaluate. So he says, like, hey, because a lot of people are like, oh, we're in a constitutional crisis. Like, what does that even mean? So he's defining that as, you know, based on Trump allegedly defying federal judges. So in order to evaluate this properly, I figured we could go down a timeline of events, because without knowing the timeline, it's going to be very difficult to understand or to decide whether or not Trump is defying anybody. So here's a timeline, and should I pull it up? Maybe, yeah, no, I'm not gonna pull it up. We'll just do it like this. We'll just go like this. Okay, you can just see me today. We're not gonna have too many graphics and videos. All right, so on Friday, March 14th, Trump invoked the Alien Enemies Act of 1798, targeting Tren de Aragua. I can't say it smoothly. I can say it if I stop. Um, However, he didn't tell anybody. So he just did this quietly, very secretly. This is on Friday evening. Then on Saturday, March 15th, 11:30 a.m. And in the show notes is a link to, I believe it's ABC News, it might be NBC News, and that's where I get all the timestamps from this. Okay? So Saturday, March 15th at 11:30 a.m. Eastern Time, U.S. District Judge James Boasberg issues a temporary restraining order blocking 5 specific Venezuelans on the ground from being deported on the grounds that the Alien Enemies Act is illegal because it was invoked during peacetime. We're going to get to that here in a few moments. 1 p.m. Trump administration appeals Boasberg's TRO. So they recognize it. Okay? They recognize his temporary restraining order as something legitimate because they go through the legitimate process of appealing it. 3:30 p.m. 2 buses deport El Valley Detention Center en route to Valley International Airport. 3:51 p.m. Trump releases his Friday proclamation publicly. So he publicly made the proclamation that he's invoking the Alien Enemies Act Friday, and then at by late afternoon on Saturday, he lets people know about it. Okay. Now we already know that we've got some buses en route. 5 p.m. Boasberg, the judge, holds emergency hearing to consider expanding the temporary restraining order to all non-citizens in U.S. custody. Then at 5:22 p.m., he pauses the hearing so that the Department of Justice lawyers can confirm if non-citizens were actively being deported via the Alien Enemy Act declaration. So at 5:22, they're in the middle of this emergency hearing, and the Department of Justice lawyers are like, well, we'll have to go and confirm that. Huh. All right. 5:25 and 5:44 p.m. 2 deportation flights leave Texas carrying roughly 250 to 300 Venezuelans, including the alleged gang members. At 5:25 p.m., they left en route to El Salvador, and 5:44 p.m., that plane left en route to Honduras. 6:05 p.m., Boasberg, the judge, resumes the emergency hearing. Okay? They've already left. He's resuming because he's like, "Look, go find out if there's deportations happening right now, because somehow, as the lawyers, you don't seem to know this, right? Like, you're here arguing this case, you're appealing this ruling, and you can't even tell me what's happening on the ground." So he said, "Go figure that out." And then they come back. They resume the emergency hearing at 6:05. At this point, the Deputy Assistant Attorney General Drew Ensign declines to say if deportations were happening, citing, can you guess it? National security. But later, he acknowledges that flights had left. So he knew, at least at 6:05, and just throwing this out there, what are the odds that they really needed to go find out at, what was that, 5:22? Like, at not even 5:30, just after 5 o'clock. What are the odds that they weren't aware if there were any flights and then they were made aware by 6 p.m.? It's possible. Don't tell your lawyer stuff and then they don't have to lie in court. Possible, I suppose. But really, they didn't know the plan. Between 6:46 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, or around 6:46 p.m., Boasberg verbally orders planes to return to the U.S. These flights were currently over the Yucatan Peninsula. That would be international waters now. So then at 7:26, he issues a brief written order memorializing his decision. So he puts it formally. 7:37 p.m., the first deportation flight that departed Texas arrives in Honduras. 8:10 p.m., the second deportation flight also arrived in Honduras. 9 p.m., the Trump administration files a notice of appeal to challenge Boasberg's temporary restraining order. So this is the one where he's like, "Look, turn those planes around," but they're like, "We can't because they're in international waters." 11:39 p.m., the first deportation flight departs Honduras for San Salvador, El Salvador. 11:43 p.m., the second deportation flight departs Honduras for San Salvador, El Salvador. Okay, so just a few minutes apart. They land pretty quick, pretty close together. They leave pretty close together. That's Saturday. Sunday, March 16th, 12:10 a.m., the first deportation flight lands in El Salvador. 12:18 p.m. or a.m., the second deportation flight lands in El Salvador. 1 a.m., the Trump administration files an emergency motion with the D.C. Circuit Court to stay Boasberg's temporary restraining order. So, the Trump administration has on multiple times filed or went through the process to say, no, we disagree with this restraining order. But the big question that we have is, does this represent a constitutional crisis? Well, first, we have to ask if Trump really defied a federal judge. So here's what it appears. It appears that the Trump administration, what they did was to expedite the process quickly in order to evade what they knew would happen. That's what it looks like. Because remember, he quietly invoked the Alien Enemies Act on Friday night. It isn't publicly published, so the public doesn't know about it, presuming the judge as well, because they're asking questions and whatnot. It isn't until the next day about 4 p.m., almost 4 p.m. And that's after the judge imposes a temporary restraining order on the 5 alleged members of Tren de Aragua. During the emergency court hearing, Judge Boasberg pauses the hearing so the Department of Justice lawyers can find out if deportations are already happening, because they supposedly don't know. I'm not so confident, but it's possible. After they resume, the Deputy Assistant General, Attorney General, he refuses to say whether deportations were happening, claiming national security. And then when it's all finally divulged, when they finally get down to where the judge can make a decision, the planes are conveniently in international waters outside of U.S. jurisdiction. In other words, if the timing is accurate, then what Trump did was evade the spirit of the law while apparently complying with the letter of it. I mean, his admins filed appeals, but they argued their actions were in compliance. Right. So, and think about this for a second. You don't file appeals if you believe that what somebody else is doing is overextending their authority, pointing that out. So, given Trump's secrecy, the appeals, the effort to expedite before a judge can intervene, and acknowledging that their administration isn't defying the judges, the argument that judges have no oversight is undermined by Trump's own administration. Point that out. So if the case is that judicial review does not apply, then none of that would be necessary. So we'll just hold on to that. It's jumping ahead just a little bit. But again, is this a constitutional crisis? I say no. Number one, the timeline is fast, but it appears that they followed the letter of the law, or at least tried to follow the letter of the law. So, like, if you're trying to follow the letter of the law and you make a mistake, I'm not gonna. I'm not gonna. That may not be intentional. I was like, look, I tried to follow the law. I was trying to game the system, but I was trying to game it legally. Okay, fine. You're still trying to game the system, and that's an issue. But if you're trying to follow the law, then that means you actually respect it on some level. And think about this. Court cases have been won and lost on the basis of punctuation. So details matter, right? And police do this all the time. They work out their plans if they're going to try to arrest somebody, this high profile or something like that. Maybe not high profile, but like, high stakes arrest or something like that, like where, hey, things can hit the fan or whatnot. Right. So this idea that people would expedite a process, that they would keep things close to the chest, that's not really unheard of. Number two, knowing how the system might work and using it to your advantage, in my opinion, is not a constitutional crisis. Otherwise, many people who have went free on technical grounds would have created one long ago. So again, as I pointed out a moment ago, following the rules, but gaming the system by understanding the rules and working them to your advantage is not something that's specific to this particular case. This happens all the time, right? In fact, you probably have heard like there have been cases where a lawyer is like, "Oh, I've heard people talk about this. Right? My lawyer, will try to delay, a case until it gets to a particular judge that they find to be more lenient or more strict or whatever the need is at the time." Right. Like, so sometimes lawyers will know who the judge is. They know how to talk to them. They game in the system, right? Like they're trying to get the result that they want. So knowing the system and gaming it, in my opinion, is something that happens all the time. And so if it's a constitutional crisis here, then it has been a constitutional crisis. Um, Number three, historically, you can find more egregious examples in history. And to my knowledge, no constitutional crisis was determined. So, for instance, consider Andrew Jackson's clash with the Supreme Court in 1832. In Worcester versus Virginia, the court ruled that Georgia could not regulate Cherokee lands, implying that the federal government should protect the tribe. Jackson reportedly said, quote, "John Marshall has made his decision. Now let him enforce it," end quote. And then he did nothing to stop Georgia's actions, effectively ignoring the ruling. Now, one might debate that was a matter of inaction, but it's one of several instances in history where the executive branch ignored the judicial branch. So this has happened before in instances where I think it was even more egregious. Um, this is a similar clash, in my opinion, where both branches are basically flexing their muscle on the matter. Now, then he goes on and he says, like, hey, they're breaking our checks and balances. Well, again, I don't find that it breaks them. And let's go back to that little picture there. I'm sorry, my screenshot. So here's where he says, he goes, the executive is ignoring the judicial and in turn breaking our checks and balances. So I don't believe that he's ignoring the judicial, because the evidence does seem to be like, hey, they're filing appeals, they're doing things, in a way so that they can honestly say yes or no, with the exception of maybe the lawyers who are like, gee, I don't know if there's any flights going. But then again, maybe they like, look, don't tell me your plans. And when the judge asks me, I will be able to honestly tell them I don't know, and then I can come to you, and then you give me the like, they could work that out. Like, that's gaming the system, and I think they did. I think they knew the system, they knew how it was gonna play out. The lawyers were like, "Look, this is the kind of judge we want. This is probably, this is the process. This is how it's gonna work. Don't tell me the details," so on and so forth. All right. So I don't think we're breaking the checks and balances here. Um, Strains it, sure, but the dust hasn't settled yet. Not to mention, like I said, we could find instances where I could argue that judges have played clever with the judicial system. Like, Constitution is a living document. Anyone? Right. So, like, this whole checks and balances thing, if it's broke or broken, it has been for a long time, and we can look at any number of things that illustrate it. But if we look at those and we say, well, it's not been broken, the checks and balances, then it isn't broken anymore now because of this one particular instance, especially when I think there are more egregious instances in the past that we can look at. So another example, and I mentioned this a moment ago, but just to repeat it, um, you've heard about lawyers who repeatedly seek to delay a trial until they get a particular judge. It's the same concept. They're looking to use the system to their advantage, and that's what it reads to me. It reads to me that they were basically just like, okay, let's work this system to our advantage, and if they did it correctly and they didn't lie, then no, there's not a constitutional crisis. But I do believe the issue should be a huge concern for Americans. And we should rightfully see this as an abuse of power by the president, right? Like, we should see this kind of manipulation as abuse of power. Now, not everything can be enumerated in law, so we're left to work with the spirit of the law and the letter of the law to produce the most meaningful result for people in this country. What is concerning here is that some of those members may not have committed any violent crimes or even be gang members. So the people, the 250 to 300 people, it's unclear whether or not they have actually committed any violent crimes. It's unclear if they're even a gang member. Maybe they are. It's a good chance. There's possible that they could all be terrible, vicious gang members that we don't want in our country. But we don't have evidence of that. We don't have the documentation. We don't have a court case or any kind of hearing or anything that says that we verified who they are. We verified what they're guilty of. And again, it's possible that all of them are very bad people. But Americans should be concerned about secretly invoking additional powers. That's what the war powers is. These aren't powers that you have on a regular day-to-day basis. These are powers that you have when you invoke the War Powers Act. People disappearing in the middle of the night, manipulating the system to avoid due process, which would ensure that everyone deported is indeed the criminal the government claims they are. These are things that people should be concerned about altogether. Like, any one of them, you could argue and say maybe not such a big deal, right? You secretly invoke additional powers, but you don't tell anybody till the next day. Okay, well, if you didn't do anything with those powers, then no big deal, right? It's fine. If you disappear somebody in the middle of the night, well, I think that's probably always a big deal. I can't think of a case situation where I would say that's not a big deal on its own. But then manipulating the system to avoid due process, um, when you add all three of them together, problem. We should be concerned. And if you might think, because I had some people on social media try to say this, if you think deporting the wrong person cannot happen, you are mistaken. Let me show you something. This is pretty wild. And this is old. Okay. So here's an article from the ACLU. Now, I had somebody go, "Oh, I don't trust the ACLU." Okay, fine. Then go look up the information from whatever source that you like. Go find it somewhere else because you can find it. So here's this is the title is, "Yes, the U.S. wrongfully deports its own citizens." Citizens, people, citizens. The title should, you should be awake by now. You should not need caffeine after hearing that. Wait a minute, what? The U.S. wrongfully deports its own citizens? Now, when was this written? Well, this was written in 2013. Now, you can find other examples. I think there's even examples in like 2018. You can find them earlier. right? There are examples throughout, the last couple decades. I just picked one. So I'm going to read you a little bit of this. Make sure I got it up on the screen here. We got it on this? Yeah, we go. All right. So this week's New Yorker features the harrowing ordeal of Mark Little, right? So there's a link to the New Yorker if you'd prefer that. A U.S. citizen with mental disabilities who was deported to Mexico. Little was born in North Carolina and has psychiatric and cognitive disabilities. He was inexplicitly referred to Immigration and Customs Enforcement in 2008 after being misidentified as an undocumented immigrant from Mexico, even though he had never been to Mexico, shared no Mexican heritage, and did not speak any Spanish. How do you misidentify? Like, is he just got a nice tan? Was he wearing a sombrero for Halloween? How do you misidentify that? As the New Yorker article notes, Little is brown skinned, and the vagaries of race and ethnicity obviously played a part in causing him to be singled out for immigration enforcement. It was a brown guy who was mentally disabled. So he looked the part, and then he gets deported. ICE detained Little for 51 days. They detained him for a month and a half. Actually, a little over a month and a half, about a month and 2/3. He was detained for 51 days. And they were still like, yeah, he seems like he's a Mexican. Despite substantial evidence that he is a US citizen and put him in removal proceedings where he was forced to defend himself without ever having the assistance of a lawyer. Huh. Little was ordered removed in December 2008 and forced to cross the Mexican border on foot with only $3 in his pocket. Little endured 125 days wandering through Mexico, Honduras, Nicaragua, and Guatemala, sleeping in streets and shelters, and even being imprisoned in a Honduran jail before he was finally referred to a U.S. consular officer in Guatemala who actually listened to his story. The officer obtained confirmation of Little's U.S. citizenship by calling one of his brothers who serves in the U.S. military. Only through the extensive efforts of Little's family and lawyer was he able to finally return. Little's tale is unfortunately far from unique, although no exact numbers exist. ICE regularly detains and deports U.S. citizens without ever providing them with a lawyer. And the U.S. continues to run a system of detention and deportation that fails adequately to protect the rights of vulnerable individuals like Little. So this happened in 2013. Now, you might recall 2013. You probably don't. We didn't have a Donald Trump that had won the election and promised mass deportations quickly. We had your regular run of the mill ICE doing their job, right? That's what they did. So, like normal circumstances, what happens when you rush things? Mistakes are made. So, I think right off the bat, number one, Chris Mowry is wrong, right? I don't believe that we're in a constitutional crisis. I don't believe that you can make the argument that the executive is ignoring the judicial, not based on the timeline. And I don't believe that based on historical, comparison, that our checks and balances are broken. Okay, you could say they're broken if you want to include other things, but I don't think you can make the argument that they're broken on this one thing. Like they were fine, you know, 10 days ago, but now our checks and balances are broken because, Trump was evading judicial review. Like I don't think you could make the argument, individually. You're going to have to include other things. And that means you're going to have a broader conversation. But again, this is still a problem because it's a due process issue. And we want people to have proper due. And even when they're supposedly getting some level of due process, as we just saw with Little, who was detained for 51 days and then wandered around several countries for 125 days, right? Even when we're doing it the right way, when we have the policies and the procedures mapped out, mistakes are still made. So I still think there's an issue of concern to be had here. And we're going to get into that as soon as we come back from break. First thing I'm going to do is let's go to some comments here and let's see what people are saying in the chat. First, we need some music here. All right, there's my cool music. All right, hopefully I didn't look at the comments, but hopefully all the sound was fine because it was weird earlier. I don't know what was going on. Yeah, initially the audio sounds glitchy on intro. Yeah, I was hearing that. I was hearing some weird feedback, and I was looking at everything, and I I I, I didn't see anything. So let me see. Let's go back here. Hold on. Let's go back to full me. You know, music is all mine. All right, let's see what we got here. Yeah, I know. So I see you on X, but can't make comments because not premium. You should be able to make comments. I think there are two posts. One where it's just like the link, and then the other one where it's got like the picture and all that. And it doesn't see like I don't know. I don't know what's going on with it. So let me see if I can pull that up. Let's see here. Yeah, because I can see Joe has made some comments. Um, let's see. Dred Scott ruling was constitutional because SCOTUS said so. Um, EO 9066 was constitutional because SCOTUS said. I don't know what that EO is, Executive Order 9066. I probably should know. And if somebody says it, I'm going to be like, oh, yeah, okay. But the point that Joe's making when he's posting on social media, on Twitter, he's basically saying there have been things in our history that have been later determined to not be constitutional. They once were considered constitutional. So even if we consider this constitutional right now, like we might later look back and go, yeah, it really wasn't. Right. We may get our heads screwed on straight. Now, I don't believe that this is a constitutional, that Trump is abiding by the Constitution. He may be abiding by the letter of the law, but I think he's trying to evade and get around it, just based on the reading of the timeline. So that's where I am. And sorry, Joe, I can't put your stuff up on the screen because it's coming from X, and X does not come through. Anyway, let's see what else we got here. Yes, my VA lady points out that I am 13 followers from 100 on Rumble. That's important because you get me to 100, and I can jump in on their streamer program. They got a program where basically if you have 100 followers and you've got so much activity within the last, whatever days, that you can get in on their program and hopefully earn some money. And I would definitely like to make some money for all my hard work, even though I know that sometimes I'm a little bit inconsistent, but I promise I try to put in so much work that hopefully that when I deliver, it's worth it to you guys. So, you'll have to let me know. Okay. So Joe Hanoush clarified. Now, again, like I said, I'm going to feel stupid. Um, Government putting American citizens in Japanese descent in camps during World War II. That was Executive Order 9066. I just didn't recognize it off the top of my head. So, but yes, now that you mention it, okay. So I told you I would feel stupid, but it's okay. All right, let's see what else we got in here. Keith points out maybe this is how it's supposed to work. Conflict between the parts instead of cooperation, which is bad for we the people. There is some truth to that. Now, I would argue that we don't always want to have like conflict or butting of heads, conflict, if you will. But it is a good thing because that means our system is working. That means, they're watching each other, they're making challenges. Maybe the challenges are legit, maybe they're not, right? But that's what we want out of system. I don't think we want it to always be in conflict. Well, honestly, as a libertarian, I probably wouldn't mind. Anyway, that's a conversation for another day. Let's see here. Let's see what else. I know we got a couple other comments. Looks like there's some conversations going on in the chat, so I will let those be. It looks like there's some. I'm not gonna address the comments because I don't want to jump in the middle of a conversation. So, all right, let's go to intermission here. We're gonna come back and then we're gonna evaluate the redheads' response and see if it's any better, which I've already told you it's not, but I will describe how. So let's go to intermission. We'll be back.
Hey, Liberty fam, do me a favor. If you enjoy the show, be sure to hit the like and subscribe button to my channel. And for the really serious folks out there, I want you to hit that bell so that you never miss an episode. By the way, if you want to support the show, head over to libertydad.locals.com and sign up. For $5, you can be part of this show. There, I'll engage supporters of the show. We'll discuss topics that you want me to talk about, response videos that you would like to see, or anything related to the show. And I'll even have a monthly subscribers only episode. By the way, I'm always looking for dads to join me for Dad Talk. That's my series where I invite everyday dads on to talk about what's important to them in the context of being a dad. No argument, no debate, and dads choose the topic. It's my way of raising dad voices. If you're a dad or you know a dad who has something to say, let's get connected. Episodes air live on Friday mornings or Friday evenings, whichever works best for dads. All right, let's get back to the show.
Oh, okay. I'm going to have to fix that. For whatever reason, it didn't jump back to where it was supposed to. All right. Anyway. Okay. So we saw what Chris said. So now let's go and evaluate what the redhead said. So here's her response. And I don't know if I'm pronouncing the person's name, but in Ludecke, 1948, SCOTUS ruled the Alien Enemy Act grants the POTUS broad discretion to remove alien enemies during war, invasion, incursion, that it persist until formally ended, treaty or proclamation, and SCOTUS is outside its powers to interfere, you constitutional retard. Now, I picked up on that constitutional retard because the redhead happens to regularly say, hey, look, I'm a constitutional scholar right here. This was like back earlier in February. This is pretty recent. I'm not like digging up something she said 2 years ago. If you look up, if you follow her, you'll find that she regularly says, "I'm a constitutional scholar." Okay? So, and this comment here is related to something else. It's just one that I found just because I want to make sure that if I'm criticizing somebody, I'm being honest about it. Okay? We want to make sure that all our criticism is honest and makes some sort of valid point. We're not just criticizing people to criticize. All right. So I'm going to be a little tougher on her because number one, she claims to be a scholar despite any actual scholarly work. Just for the record, folks, posting on social media does not make you a scholar. Memorizing, the whole Constitution does not make you a scholar. But we're not going to really quibble with that too much. Another reason I'm going to be tougher on her is she has a very large following, and I think she's misleading people right here. And most importantly, she's just wrong. So we're going to address that so that you won't be wrong. Now, just because I found Chris incorrect doesn't mean that I necessarily would find her correct, right? So we have this thing in society where if there's two parties and somebody's like, "Well, I believe party A is wrong," then people are like, "Oh, so you believe party B is right?" I'm like, no, I can actually believe that party A and party B are both wrong. I can believe that they're both correct. I can believe that one is correct and one is incorrect. There's like four variations here, right? I just said three, but if you reverse who's right and who's wrong, that gives you a fourth one. So there's four variations of four possibilities between two different parties. And we need to bring ourselves to understand that because it happens like if I say I'm not voting for Donald Trump, people are like, oh, what makes Kamala Harris so great? Like I didn't say that anything was great about her. In fact, I think she's terrible too. Right? Like this is something that we need to really come to terms with. But anyway, let's break down this comment. So there are three elements here. Number one, she says in Ludecke, SCOTUS ruled the Alien Enemy Act grants the POTUS broad discretion to remove alien enemies during war, invasion, incursion. That is, where's my little button? That's true. All right. Second thing she said, second claim, it persists, the Alien Enemy Act, persist until formally ended, treaty or proclamation. That is also true. Last thing she said was SCOTUS is outside its powers to interfere. That's wrong. That is not correct. So we're going to walk through this and we're going to see why the redhead is either correct or incorrect in this. All right. So in Ludecke versus Watkins, okay, this is what she said again. We'll put it up on the screen. Let's put this up on the screen real quick. Bam. There we go. All right.
SCOTUS ruled the Alien Enemy Act grants the POTUS broad discretion to remove alien enemies during war, invasion, incursion. So let me point out here, just kind of give a little background. According to Ludecke versus Watkins, the Alien Enemy Act was close enough to enactment of the Constitution that it was deemed consistent with the Constitution. So that was one of the arguments that they made. So what's going on here is that Ludecke was a German citizen, and he had been in the country for like 23 years, and then we went to war, and it was post war. The dust was still settling, and President Truman was like, "Hey, we're gonna remove you. You are a threat to us, so we're gonna remove you." And so then he basically filed an appeal and said, "Hey, look, the war is over, and how are you gonna deport me to a place that doesn't even have a government yet? Right? Like that doesn't even make sense. How can I be, a threat to you for a government that doesn't exist?" That was kind of his argument. And it's worth pointing out that this ruling, which ended up ruling that he could be deported, the ruling was 5-4. So it was kind of narrow, right? Out of nine justices, five of them ruled in favor, four of them were against. So this is not like it wasn't like 8-1. It wasn't all nine of them agreed. So let me show you something here. Where is my, let's go to this. All right, so we're going to do this. And yes. Okay, so here we are. So here is from the actual ruling from Ludecke from 1948. So we're going to read through it, and we're going to see if SCOTUS ruled the Alien Enemy Act grants POTUS broad discretion to remove alien enemies during war, invasion, incursion, right? So we want to make sure that we verify stuff. So here it is. Let me bring it up so I can see it a little bit better here. Whenever there is a declared war between the United States and any foreign nation or government, that's important, keep that in mind, or an evasion or predatory incursion is perpetrated, attempted, or threatened against the territory of the United States by any foreign nation or government, and the president makes public proclamation of the event, all natives, citizens, denizens, or subjects of the, let me change, event, of the hostile nation or government being of the age of 14 years and upward, who shall be within the United States and not actually naturalized, shall be liable to be apprehended, restrained, secured, and removed as alien enemies. So, right off the bat, we're finding that, like, yeah, they said that. They said, like, hey, we're at war. We have some type of wartime situation with another country. You, if you're not naturalized, if you're an immigrant, every one of you, or no matter what classification, you're liable to be apprehended, restrained, secured, and removed as alien enemies. All right. Excuse me. All right. So that's the first thing that we've got. Now I want to point out that uh, this was invoked three times. That's not three times in our history. The War of 1812 against British nationals, and then also World War I and World War II against German, Austro-Hungarian, Japanese, and Italian immigrants. Now, the Constitution only permits Congress to declare war. Might sound simple, but a lot of people seem to have forgotten that. But invasion and incursion are not specifically defined. Like anywhere that I could find, there was no formal, like this is when they wrote the words invasion and predatory incursion, I didn't see anything that says, here's how we're defining them. War seems pretty clear, right? Like two nations fighting each other, maybe sending some rockets over, sending some fighters over, whatever, right? An invasion, those kind of things. Um, but what does it mean, you know, separate from war? What do the words invasion and incursion specifically mean? That's again left up to people to debate, I guess. But the president only needs to make a proclamation of what is happening. So it sounds like kind of like a done deal, right? Like you only need to make a proclamation and call it a deal, right? Not quite. Let's move on to the second part of her statement. So that it persists until formally ended. There's a treaty or proclamation. So now we've invoked this Alien Enemies Act after there's some sort of event. If it's a war, only Congress can declare war. We're going to set aside the incursion and the invasion for just a moment. We'll get to that in just a second here. Right. So now we're dealing with that it persists until formally ended. So how long
does the president have to do this? Well, until the president has or Congress has declared, as we'll find out here. So let's go back and then let's see here. Boom, there we go. All right, so that's up on the screen. All right, so here it is. Again, we're reading from the ruling. There is no indication in the debates or in the terms of the statute that the exercise of the power, when properly invoked, I underline that because that's very important, should cease until peace was made, and peace has not been made in the present case. So, what they're saying is okay, the dust is starting to settle, but we haven't actually worked out peace terms yet. Kind of like everybody's fighting, like two guys are fighting on the street, and somebody breaks up the fight. There's that moment where the fight is broken up, but the hostilities are not necessarily over. The guys could continue going at it right there, right? Or they haven't quite left the scene to go and settle down, and maybe hopefully call each other later and be like, all right, dude, yeah, I was wrong. Sorry, blah, 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 whatever, right? So they haven't made peace. We're still within this time frame where there's war and then there's like the aftermath, the immediate aftermath of war, where you could still have some things happening. So that's what they're talking about here. All right. So when properly invoked during war or an invasion and predatory incursion. So remember, only Congress can declare war. Trump made his proclamation on March 15th, 2025. So let's go and take a look at that. Well, actually, you know what? Before we look at that document, let's finish up with these other ones here. So let me see which 3 to 5. So okay, perfect. So here's a follow up of that. So we're just going to kind of go through. So the court would be assuming the functions of the political agencies of the government to yield to the suggestion that the unconditional surrender of Germany and the disintegration of the Nazi Reich have left Germany without a government capable of negotiating treaty of peace. Okay, so that's what they say, and then they go on. It is not for us to question a belief by the president that the enemy aliens who were justifiably deemed fit subjects for internment during active hostilities do not lose their potency for mischief during the period of confusion and conflict, which is characteristic of a state of war, even when the guns are silent, but the peace of peace has not come. So they're basically saying, they're like, look, if we're not going to question the president if he believes that there's leftovers. It's basically what he's saying. Like there's wars officially ended, but there's leftovers. There's people that might throw a Molotov cocktail somewhere. Somebody might start shooting again, right? We're still in that time frame, the immediate aftermath. So they're like, look, we're not going to question that. That's not for us. I think elsewhere they call it a political decision. And so in this particular case, they're kind of drawing a line. They're saying, here's the boundary for the court. All right. So let's go ahead and let's take a look at what Trump. Let me see where to go here. So let's take a look because I want to show you Trump's invocation because I think it's very important. Let me get there. Boom, there it is. Okay, so here it is on the screen. And invocation of the Alien Enemies Act regarding the invasion of the United States by Tren de Aragua. All right, I'm gonna get good at saying that. So we're gonna. I think I just got like a couple of highlights here that I wanted to point out. Tren de Aragua is a designated foreign terrorist organization with thousands of members, many of whom unlawfully infiltrated the United States and are conducting irregular warfare and undertaking hostile actions against the United States. And then he goes down further and he says, supporting the Maduro regime's goal of destabilizing democratic nations in the Americas, including in the United States. So he's making a couple claims here. He's number one, he's saying like this is now designated a foreign terrorist organization, and the reason that we've determined that is because they're conducting irregular warfare and undertaking hostile actions. And then he goes on and he says they're supporting the Maduro regime's goal of destabilizing democratic nations in the Americas, including the U.S. So he's basically like the government of Venezuela is taking action against us through these gangs, right? And that's that. So
when people are like, oh, he's not adhering to the law or whatever, that's actually not true because he set this whole thing up to follow this idea that, hey, if it's a government making an incursion, if it's making a predatory, a predatory incursion or an invasion, right? He can't just say it's a bunch of people because that's not what the ruling says. That's not what the Enemies Act says. It all talks about foreign governments. So he has to tie it to a foreign government. And he does that in his proclamation. This is probably why, one of the reasons why, they did not publish it right away. Because if you had read this, I mean, we're only in the first paragraph here, folks. If you had read this, you would have been like, oh, what's he up to? Right? Like he's trying to say that that Venezuela is attacking our country effectively. It's basically what he's saying. I think I have another. So here's my last highlight from this. Over the years, Venezuelan national and local authorities have ceded ever greater control over their territories to transnational criminal organizations, including TDA. The result is a hybrid criminal state that is perpetrating, quote, an invasion of and predatory incursion into the United States, which poses a substantial danger to the United States. You see what he's done here? He has followed the letter of the law by framing this in order to look like he's following the letter of the law, in order to look like the events are exactly as would be understood by the law when the law was written, which was in 1798. Now, historically, we find the usage of these two phrases, invasion and predatory incursion, to mean literal attacks by state sponsored entities, thus his language. But I want to point out something that I found. Again, I went into a deep dive. So we're gonna look over here to this letter to Alexander Hamilton from Timothy Pickering on June 9th, 1798. So this is like, I think July 1798 is when the Alien Enemies Act was voted upon. So this is like a month prior. So I'm not going to read the whole thing. I'm just going to read the highlights that I think are interesting. So he's talking about these bills, these four bills that make up the Alien Enemies Act. The alien bills introduced into both houses of Congress have undergone such alterations, I do not know their present form. Of one thing, however, you may be rest assured that they will not err on the side of severity, much less of cruelty. I wish they may really provide for the public safety. This is Timothy Pickering, writing to Alexander Hamilton in 1798, and he's talking about these bills that are currently in Congress. So here's where it gets interesting. We scroll down here, way down. Where did it go? Oh, I lost it. I lost my other highlight. Where'd my other highlight go? No, I lost it. We can find it real quick. So, okay. All right. I don't know why I got hidden. Let's see here. Where do we want to go down to? We'll go with this. We'll highlight this. We'll highlight it on demand. All right. All right. So here's where he's talking about. He says small predatory incursions of the French, because they're talking about the French right now, though they might occasion great destruction of property, would not be dangerous, and the militia might be sufficient to repel them. Now, that's an interesting point. We're going to get to that in just a second. But what we have to guard against is an invasion by a powerful army of veterans. I do not know any body of militia adequate to stop their progress, and a fatal panic might be the consequence. They would hold out their lives to entice, and they would entice multitudes not to resist, at least if they did not join their standard, as happened in every republic in Europe, which they have fraternized. I have indeed a confidence in the populace, well armed and unanimous northern states. But is there any 40,000 of that militia who could encounter with any success 20,000 veterans? So this is very interesting because this is describing predatory incursions in the context of being state-sponsored French. So remember, Trump has associated it with Venezuela, but he's also in the context of being two different capacities. So you have the smaller, which is manageable by the militia, and then you have the larger, what he calls a powerful army of veterans, and notes that this is, quote, what we have to guard against. So what's fascinating about this, and what blows my mind for anybody that claims to be a constitutional scholar, is that they didn't point out that, hey, when this was written, the understanding of the time is that that incursion or a predatory incursion or invasion was not only state sponsored, but it exceeded the level under which a standard militia could defend against, like it could. And so the distinction here is made like, hey, if it's a small one, let the militia deal with it. That's the implication here. But if it's a large one, then these bills might be useful to us. But nobody's talking about, and what am I saying? Let's be very clear what I'm saying here. For Second Amendment defenders, Second Amendment's in the Constitution for the scholars out there. People should be like, hey, given my knowledge of the Constitution, I think that Trump is playing a little bit loose with this, and he's degrading our Second Amendment. Because if it's a small incursion, if it's a small invasion, then our militia should be able to handle it. And we do not need war powers assigned to the president. We might need them, though, if it's a larger force. So, predatory incursion and invasion are used in the context of two critical concepts. Number one, entry, right? They got to come into the country. Number two, enmity, like animosity, like they've got a beef with the government. They're coming here to topple it, to do something, to disrupt our government. Okay? So in other words, entering as a criminal gang, such as Tren de Aragua, does not pass any historical test or understanding of the terms invasion or predatory incursion at the time, unless they pose a threat to the government or potentially invade in such large numbers that a militia could not handle them. Again, since militia includes the people, ardent 2A supporters, constitutional scholars, should treat this as meaning, at the minimum, the police of a given jurisdiction, but also potentially police and citizens. So at a minimum, we should at least say, all right, if your local police department can handle this, then let them handle it. We don't need to invoke the federal government, right? Like even if it's Mexico sending some people over into Texas, if Texas can handle it, let Texas handle it. If it's even small enough for a town to handle it, then let the town handle it. Do you know what that sounds like? That sounds like proportional response. So Tren de Araguas is most active in Colorado, right? Texas, New York City, and Chicago. The numbers in totality are estimated to be between 500 and 1,000 nationwide. So in Colorado, you're looking at like dozens. In Texas, you're looking at 100 to 200. In New York City, 100 to 300. In Chicago, we're back down to about a dozen or so, some number of dozens. And again, 500 to 1,000. Arguably, even twice that could be handled by the militia. So from my reading of history here, Trump is overextending the definition of predatory incursion. He's tying it to Venezuela, but when we look back, we see that the attitude of the time was to distinguish between small and large armies or small and large forces coming at us. And so that's when we need. Now, again, this is a letter, right? So I get it. It's not formal, but this is the attitude of the day. This is the conversation that they were having. And I think that's important to know. All right. So let's see. Let's continue on here. Where are we? Let's go back to my screenshot there. Okay. So the last one. This is where we get it wrong. SCOTUS is outside its powers to interfere. So let's take a look at what the actual ruling had to say, and then we will. Let's see here. Where are you? No, I want this one. There we go. All right. So here, this is what it says. We got a couple slides here. It says the very nature of the president's power to order the removal of all enemy aliens rejects the notion that courts may pass judgment upon the exercise of his discretion. So that kind of sounds like, hey, Supreme Court has no power here, right? Gandalf, you have no power here. Right? But that's not true. And you pay attention to the wording here because it's going to come up in just a second. The exercise of his discretion. What does the president have the discretion to do? One, decide like, okay, like, well, the president doesn't have, he cannot decide, um, he cannot declare war. And so that's left to Congress. But he can decide whether or not there are still hostilities. He can decide whether or not there's still a big threat. This is after, right? So this is not talking about can he invoke it. This is talking about after it's been invoked. Then he has discretion on does this person represent a threat? What can I do with them? Right? We read that back in the previous one. So let's see where we go. Right here, I think this is the one. So it says it is not for us to question a belief by the president that the enemy aliens who were justifiably deemed fit subjects for internment during active hostilities do not lose their potency for mischief during the period of confusion and conflict. Right? So it's not for us to question. So they are laying out some areas where they're like, this is not for us. And then they go on here and they say the power to order the removal. You cannot order the removal until after you invoke. So then we go forward and we see that it goes on to say the power with which Congress vested the president had to be executed by him through others. Okay, that's like your attorney general, whatever. He provided for the removal of such enemy aliens as were, quote, deemed by the attorney general, end quote, to be dangerous. But such a finding at the president's behest was likewise not to be subject to the scrutiny of the courts, right? So, in other words, like when the attorney general is doing it, the courts also have no power here. So again, we've invoked the act and presuming that it gets properly, which we'll address in just a second. And then after that, the president has powers. And that's the powers that he has after it's been invoked is what SCOTUS cannot, what they cannot determine. What they're saying, nope, it's not within our purview. It's out of our authority. We would be overstepping our boundaries if we said, hey, wait a minute, you can't deport that guy because he's a really nice guy, whatever. All right, let's go on. One more slide here. This is the important one. That Otis. Now, this is actually in the notes. This isn't actually in the ruling itself. This is in the notes. They have like the notes at the bottom of the page. So this is interesting. That Otis, and they're talking about when this was being debated. So now they're referencing back when the Alien Enemies Act was being debated. They said that Otis wished to add hostilities to the words declared war and failed in his attempt does not show that Congress meant that when war was declared active, hostilities must exist in order to justify the exercise of the power. So basically they're reiterating and saying, hey, as long as war has been declared, even if people aren't actively shooting at each other, fine. Like that's not what he meant when he wanted to add hostilities. All right, or I mean, sorry, it doesn't show that Congress meant that war only includes hostilities, like active hostilities. They're just saying that like Otis meant something else. The questions raised, which were dealt with in the act as finally passed, were not how long the power should last when properly invoked, but the conditions upon which it might be invoked. Okay. So those conditions were fully met in the present case, and no question is raised by appellate's counsel as the propriety of the president's proclamation of war. So what are they saying here? They're saying, look, the question here is not, you know, um, with the in the act finally passed, how long the power gets to last, because again, that's the argument being made in this particular case. Hey, the president had the right to invoke this Alien Enemy Act That's what they're making that case. They're like, hey, it's okay. But then they go on and they say, all right, but he used it far longer than he was supposed to. And so the ruling here is saying, like, look, the question is, we're not how long the power should last when properly invoked, but the conditions under which it might be invoked. Those conditions were fully met, right? And so they're distinguishing what question can be dealt with. The properly invoked would indicate that there is an improper way to invoke it. In other words, the Ludecke ruling did not forbid SCOTUS from any interference, only that of questioning the president's judgment after the Alien Enemy Act was properly invoked, which, for the record, again, means it can be improperly revoked. Like that's how it works. You can't say it's properly invoked if there's no such way to improperly invoke it. Nowhere in the ruling does the majority say or even suggest that invoking the war powers is beyond judicial review. Only that of questioning the president's judgment while it's invoked and when in peacetime. Right? That's the distinction. That's where the redhead gets it wrong. That's where people need to read this stuff and understand it. The case is complex, but it's not really so complex that the average person cannot make heads or tails of it. You just simply got to do a little reading and a little research. And I think that's a reasonable ask for most people, right? So let's see. The case, my assessment here, again, is that Chris and the redhead get it wrong. If you're a 20-something, fine. It's my adult job to correct your foolishness and help bring you along to maturity. If you're older and you claim to be a constitutional scholar, then perhaps it's wise to speak scholarly, which includes digging into the details of a ruling and the related historical facts before calling others constitutional retard. The truth is, both are constitutional retards, but at least one is young and dumb. And all that it took was actually reading up on the ruling in question, knowing the details of the particular case that we're talking about, going back and reviewing some history, and then putting it all together. Now, I want to point out something interesting because remember the timeline was really, really fast. And since we referenced the Ludecke case here, again, the redhead brought it up. Ludecke was arrested on December 8th, 1941. He was given a hearing at the Enemy Alien Hearing Board June 22nd, 1942. So about 7 months later. He was deported finally on January 18th, 1946. Now, some of that was delayed because he was pushing back and, had a lawyer and, all that good stuff. But just think about the arrest and the hearing. He was arrested in December of 1941. He got his hearing, a hearing at the Enemy Alien Hearing Board in June, 7 months later. He had a hearing. He had due process. So again, I reiterate, if you're going to claim to be a constitutional scholar and you're going to bring up a ruling and then you're going to tell falsehoods about the ruling, you are not a constitutional scholar. If you are not out there defending and saying, hey, I'm a constitutional scholar and look at this ruling here. And by the way, the details of the case were such that this person for which the case was about was arrested and 7 months later, still in the country, had a hearing, they had due process, then perhaps I should be arguing against the way that the president has undertaken this current situation because he did not give them a hearing board, as we saw as what happened in the case that you brought up. Like, I didn't bring it up. I didn't bring up this case. The redhead did. And she missed all these details and then got some of them wrong. Because, yes, there is an opportunity for judicial review to say, did you properly invoke these wartime powers? Are we in any sense at war? When we go back and we look at history, since there's no formal definition of incursion or invasion, right? War, I think I don't know if there's a formal definition, but generally everybody pretty much agrees what war is. On invasion and incursion, when we go back and we look at the sentiments of the day, there's a distinction made that says, look, maybe if it's small enough, we don't have to worry about it. But if it's large enough, we might can use some of these acts that are being debated in Congress right now. And and then he goes on. He points out, he's like, hopefully this will be, to benefit the American people. So now, why should Americans care? Remember in episode 412, the immigration rabbit hole, part 4, I interviewed an actual Venezuelan that's here legally on visa. You can go watch it. It was a good episode. Funny thing, he actually supported Trump. Now he couldn't vote, of course, and he was like, "Look, if I could vote, I would vote for Trump." He also opposed illegal immigration. He strongly opposed Tren de Aragua and other gangs. And he's exactly the kind of immigrant that Americans say they want. And yet, it's possible that the administration could say, "Hey, you're an illegal immigrant or you're part of a gang, snatch him up in the middle of the night, not tell anybody about it, evade court intervention, send him to a third world jail, and then what? What does that make us? Not great again. What happens if the government makes a mistake and sends him to that harsh third world prison by disappearing him in the middle of the night? Who knows? Getting him back would be a nightmare on top of the nightmare of just being there. It's one thing to oppose illegal immigration. And it's one thing to deport violent criminals, which I completely would support. It's another thing to disregard the spirit of the law to make that happen. And I want you to think about the case of Mahmoud Khalil, which I discussed in episode 469, where the government was also being secretive. He is a green card holder, and yet the Trump administration treated his case similar to the alleged gang members. There was secrecy. Like when they showed, and if you remember in that episode, I pointed out that the ICE agents showed up and they were like, "Yeah, we're revoking your visa." And his lawyer's like, "He doesn't have a visa. He's got a green card. He gets due process." And they're like, "Oh, yeah, we're revoking that too." Like they're apparently playing so close to the chest that people don't even know why they're arresting him. Right? And what's to stop them from doing likewise with a naturalized citizen or even a native citizen? I mean, as I showed before the break, there are documented cases of US citizens being deported and they have to fight their way back. And these were done under the standard time frame, no expediting to avoid judicial interference. So this is, yes, Americans, you should be concerned. And one of the things this irritates me to no end. I see it all the time. You argue on this and you say, yeah, people should get due process. And people come out and they're like, oh, I had a friend say this. He's a good guy, but he's wrong. And he said, why don't you tell that to the families of people that have been killed? Like, don't be an ass. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that this due process protects all of us. It protects the good people. Yes, it also protects bad people. But again, more importantly, it protects the good people. It protects me. I mean, I grew up with my white friends saying, "Dude, no, seriously, but what are you?" Like my white friends did not consider me. When it's summertime, I get a nice tan. So what happens if the government comes and is like, they snatch me up, they don't give me a lawyer, they don't tell anybody about it. They move me around so my wife can't find me and they deport me before a judge can intervene. And then I end up getting shipped off to a third world country because somebody made a mistake, right? That should not happen. And we should be concerned that it could happen. Is it possible that every last one of those people that were deported were evil, terrible, immoral, just people that need to be banished to an island somewhere? Possibly. I wouldn't doubt it necessarily. I'm not doubting that they deserve to necessarily be deported. And I'm not saying, oh, boo hoo, they didn't get due process. What I said and what I'm saying is very clear. Due process protects me, protects my wife, protects you. It protects the visa holders. It protects the green card holders. It protects immigrants of any kind that are here legally, being the exact kind of immigrant that we say we want. It protects American citizens. If we want those protections, we better damn well take them serious and stop with all the nonsense and say, President Trump, your administration is going too far. Yes, we want you to remove these people. We want you to do it right so that in the process, you don't screw up and deport the wrong person. Because once somebody's in a jail in, say, um, uh, anywhere, some third world jail, right? Well, guess what happens? Like now we have to try to fight to get them back if they even survive. That is not a situation we should take lightly. So, if nothing else, again, we're not feeling sympathy for criminals. What we're doing is we're protecting our own rights, the people that are not criminals, be they citizens or legal immigrants. And for that matter, illegal immigrants. Because if somebody just crossed the border, but they're otherwise working, doing their thing, not causing any problems, hell, they don't even drink or use drugs. They're just going to work, making money, coming home, watching TV, right? If they're doing that, sure, you could probably make an argument that they should be deported. They should be like way last on the list. We should probably even consider, hey, maybe that person doesn't need to get deported. Like, yeah, I get it. You broke the law getting over here. But otherwise, you're exactly the kind of person that we want in this country. We need to start operating on the spirit of the law and not allow the administration to exercise its muscle on the letter of the law, because that's how the spirit of the law gets broken. If you're a Christian out there, you will understand this as being legalism, where people are so worried about the rules that they forget what the purpose of the rules were for, and they basically just end up finding guilty people, right? Like there's any number of analogies that we can make. If you're in the Libertarian Party, one of the arguments has been there are some people that are so worried about Robert's Rules of Order that they just nitpick at everything that isn't quite correct, rather than trying to accomplish something good and understanding that we're here to actually do something and make some accomplishments. That's also a fair argument. You can look in any body of people and you can see where people take the rules to an extreme point and then they end up harming somebody or disrupting the purpose of the rules. So even if it turns out that several hundred deportees were all illegal immigrants who the government can show receipts for violent crime, the process should alarm American citizens greatly. Let's get to some comments here. Let's see what you guys are saying. Get my music back. Let's see. There's my music. All right, let's see what we got here. I lost my. I lost the whatever I had for X. Was showing some comments. There we go. All right. Yeah, I don't see any more under X. Let's take a look and see what we've got through the Rumble stream. Let's see. Okay, it looks like there's. I'm trying to read the comments quickly here, and identify whether or not there's anything that's directed toward me that I should. Yes. So here's Liberty Dad's Rumble. 472 Trump versus due process. Give him a follow, even if you watch here on YouTube. So thank you for that, my VA lady, in the comments, pointing out that if you're on YouTube, and you happen to have Rumble account, go over to Rumble and give me a follow. Help me get to that magic 100 mark. Let's see. Here's an interesting comment here. So a president should not be able to declare war to a war on drugs What does that even mean? Okay, I think I interrupted a conversation there, so I'm sorry about that. Let's see. I'm trying to find comments that are singular, directed toward me, so that I can talk about them. Let's see here. I think that's all. I will say this. I'm gonna be a little fair because I'm the most objective libertarian. The redhead should take libertarian out of her name. In my opinion, she's just a grifter. Her and MAGA Kingmaker should be honest with themselves and register GOP. Those are fair arguments, but I don't think that we need to make those. Personally, in my opinion, I dislike the idea of determining who is and who is not a libertarian unless we're just simply making it like a flat comment. So there's no insinuation of any kind. So if I were to say, like, hey, President Trump is not a libertarian. Why is he not a libertarian? He's not a registered member of the Libertarian Party. He hasn't done any activism with libertarians or the Libertarian Party. He's never self-identified as a libertarian, and his policies generally are not at all close to being libertarian. So therefore, the objective facts on the ground are he's not a libertarian. It's not necessarily making an insult and saying, hey, you're not a real libertarian. You get the heck out. It's not saying that. Okay. So this is my, like, other people could do what they want. I'm just making my commentary. I don't care whether the redhead says she's a libertarian or not. I know some people disagree and call her a Republican. That's fine. That's y'all's argument. My only argument here was to say, look, in this particular case, you self-identify as a constitutional scholar, and you missed a whole bunch that I think was important, right? Like, I don't think anybody else is talking about the 2A angle, right? Like, I think this degrades our Second Amendment right, because back in the day, it was understood, or it wasn't beyond what they call that, the Overton window. It wasn't outside of the Overton window to say, okay, the militia can handle this small incursion if it's small, and this incursion if it's small enough, right? Like, that would be radical today to say. They'd be like, what militia? The militia boys down the road. They'll just grab their guns and they'll go fend off the invaders. People will be like, whoa, whoa, whoa. We got police for that. We got ICE for that. We got FBI for that. We got blah, blah, blah. Any number of 3-letter agencies. We got tools for that. Like, nobody's talking about the fact that they actually believe that unless there was a large invasion, that the citizens could handle it locally-ish. And we're ceding some of the power that was understood that the citizens had, because we delegate this and we say, okay, we'll let the police handle it. Let the FBI handle it. Let ICE handle it. Let whomever handle it, right? Rather than them saying, at a minimum, at least say, hey, you know what? Based on the reading here of this ruling and the understanding of the Constitution, if it's small enough, which these are, it really should be a state issue. Like, all the states' rights people should be like, this is actually a states' rights issue. And the states should decide whether or not they want to deport these people, and they should marshal their forces. And if that means getting the militia back, then them too. Nobody's talking about that. And so that's the conversation that I would rather have. Just dive right in on the facts at hand and say, here's what people are missing. All right, folks, I've gone over. I better get out of here. Thank you for joining me today. And let's, I hit the right button. I hit the wrong button earlier. Let's head on out of here, folks, and we'll call it a day. Thank you for watching, and I hope you found this episode informative and inspiring. Be sure to catch me Monday through Friday, 7:30 a.m. for an informed discussion on politics and culture. Make sure that you're subscribed to my YouTube channel, or if you prefer my Rumble channel, you can go to youtube.libertydad.com, or you can go to rumble.libertydad.com. While you are there, let me know how I'm doing by leaving me a comment. You can also become part of the community by heading over to libertydad.locals.com. Remember, if you're a champion of liberty, your business is people and your product is liberty. I want you to have a great week. Catch you next time. But for now, I'm out.